I have a little bit longer of a talk here today, and so let's get right into this content. This is part of a multi-part series, and in case you missed our first webinar, it's on our YouTube channel. It was about the basics of ProCROSS. And so we're going to build on that today by talking about what breeds are used in ProCROSS and why, and which breeds are not used in ProCROSS and why. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about complementarity of breeds. In the future, I want to dive deep into the topics of inbreeding and hybrid vigor and why those play into this whole crossbreeding idea. Then talking in another future webinar about our research background with ProCROSS and other crossbreeding research that's been done on an international level. Last then is the topic about how to implement ProCROSS and how to select the best bulls within ProCROSS, within those pure breeds rather, that complement the ProCROSS rotation. So stay tuned to our future ads on all of those types of things. I want to start out today just by mentioning we have some major considerations that we need to talk about in order to optimize crossbreeding in dairy cattle. Sorry, those didn't pop up right. But anyways, these are the four big ideas: choosing distinct pure breeds with sizable populations and making sure that they have progressive genetic selections, making sure those breeds complement each other in their strengths and weaknesses, and then using 3 breeds in a rotation. That's part of the hybrid vigor discussion. So we're going to save that for later. And then using only high-ranking bulls, we'll save that for later. So today I'm going to talk about these first 2 points in a lot of depth. But just to recap about what rotational crossbreeding is and what ProCROSS is by definition, because that's what we do. We rotate 3 pure breeds here. Most of our herds start with a Holstein purebred baseline when they begin ProCROSS. And so how a lot of herds approach this is by starting with one or the other of the other 2 breeds. In this case, let's look at VikingRed first. That creates this F1 cow, or we'll call it generation 1 for ProCROSS. We breed that cow to a Montbelliard bull to create this 3-breed crossbred cow, which is now half Montbelliard from her sire, but then a quarter of each on average from her dam side. And then we'll come back to a VikingHolstein to complete the first rotation. So then here we have a 5/8 Holstein with 3/8 of the other 2 breeds. And because we rotate purebred sires, we'll just keep going then back to the VikingRed, then to the Montbelliard and so forth. And that keeps on going into the future. A lot of our herds will actually choose to start with Montbelliard and take the rotation the other direction. And that's a perfectly great approach too, and both directions work as far as our program. I'll get into a future webinar later about the differences between the 2 rotations. But let's talk about some individual dairy breeds. I want to show you here the prominent US dairy breeds because I am from the US, in case you couldn't tell from my accent, and I've been involved in a lot of research here and been in the dairy industry my whole life. A lot of my friends and colleagues here in the US who don't have a lot of international exposure would maybe assume that these are really your only breed choices that there are, and that's just not the case. There's a lot of breed choices around the world to consider for crossbreeding nowadays. Many of them have imported semen here in the US as well. But just to highlight their population sizes in the US, the Holstein here has 2.2 million cows, which is by far and away the largest population. Then we have Jersey with 370,000 cows. So those are 2 big populations with a very effective selection. Then we get down to the 4 more minor breeds within the US, the Brown Swiss, the Guernsey, the Ayrshire, and the Milking Shorthorn. And you can see here that I've shown the population sizes on milk recording for those breeds. They are very small guys. And what this means is that they're going to have a hard time making aggressive genetic selection with this few of cows. The other thing I want to point out here is that in total, all these combined down the column, we have 2.6 million cows contributing cow records for genetic evaluation. And with our total population being 9.4 million cows in the US, that's a pretty small proportion contributing to genetic progress. You'll see much higher rates on DHIA when you go to other countries in the world. Um, let's compare that to the other two breeds used in ProCROSS. The Montbelliard in France comes in with 404,000 cows in milk recording. So actually they're even a larger population than the US Jersey population is today. And then we have the VikingRed across the three countries of Sweden, Denmark, and Finland with 175,000 approximately. So they're going to be a very large effective selection population, much so than their analogous US breed, the US Ayrshire, and they dwarf that breed by many times over. Next, I want to talk then about these big international breed clusters across the globe, and most of them are going to originate in the Western European countries. So the three large circles I'm showing here are the major breed clusters. We have the Alpine breed cluster, considering of these three breeds which have similar genetic heritage. The channel breeds are made up of these four clusters, again, originating between the British Isles and Northern Europe. There's some differences between, a few differences between the variegations of Holstein, and certainly a lot of differences between these different VikingRed modern breeding programs, but they all originated within that same area. We have Normandy and Jersey. And then we have this grouping that I'm labeling other. It includes a lot of local breeds, which Bos indicus is also a local breed. I'm not going to, or are part of that local breed idea rather. I'm not going to get into those today. I wanted to comment though that they are really important for crossbreeding in certain environments and certain climates. The Bos indicus breeds are important for extreme heat and humidity. They do well there. They're also important to use for crossbreeding when you have a lot of disease pressure. So those of you who have fallen into that situation, what I might talk about here, including these channel breeds and the Alpine breeds, you might also need to consider one of your local breeds if you have those type of challenges. But for the everyone else, we're going to talk about, you know, the high production environments and the grazing environments that that we'll find across the rest of the world will really benefit from these breeds over here. And particularly, we've learned that the three breed clusters that include an Alpine breed, a red breed, and a Holstein breed combine very well across a large variety of environments. And then, of course, I'll dwell on the three used in ProCROSS, the Montbelliard, and contrast them with the other Alpines. I'll talk some about differences in Holsteins, and then we'll spend some time talking about the variety of red breeds that we have here. Plus, I'll make a few more remarks about Normandy and Jersey as we go on. So let's jump into these Alpine breeds here and talk first about their population sizes. They all have very large effective populations for selection, and that's really important. This cluster of Fleckvieh and milking Simmental, you might be kind of surprised at that with 1.5 million cows. Yes, there's a lot of Fleckviehs in southern Germany, Austria, and the Czech Republic, and they contribute to this heritage of the Alpine breed cluster. Some common strengths that these breeds all share. They are high protein breeds, and that's again due to their heritage as a breed cluster. They have outstanding feet and legs. They originate in the Alps regions where cows have been hiking up and down mountains for many centuries. And so they've developed this outstanding, this leg with a steep foot and a deep heel. Particularly the Montbelliard and the Fleckvieh have advantages for calf vigor and vitality, very good calf traits there. And also a high value of cull cows and bull calves for those breeds, especially due to their high muscularity and body condition. You'll note I left Brown Swiss out of those last two comments, but I'll get back to that a little bit later here in the talk. We use the Montbelliard for ProCROSS, and it offers a lot of strengths to the ProCROSS rotation in combination with the other breeds. It contributes the strength, the width, and the muscling. the body condition that really is important for crossbreeding and maintaining health and longevity. Montbelliard also contributes a lot of fertility, daughter fertility, and along with that, calf viability. The Montbelliard in particular is a very adaptable breed. They are dually selected both in grazing environments and in confinement herds at the same time. So really the genetic progress of the breed is coming from both of those camps together simultaneously. And then the Montbelliard is known for their outstanding longevity. They are longer lived cow than the other French dairy breeds that INRA reports on within France. I want to compare across, then directly compare Montbelliard with Fleckvieh and Brown Swiss, these other breeds of the similar genetic heritage, because we can't necessarily say that they're the same. They do offer different things. So let's start with talking about these top 3 rows here, the yield traits. So in this chart here, I'm classifying breeds based on a star rating system where the more stars we assign to the breed, the better they are, the larger they are, etc. So in the case of milk production and milk yield, obviously more stars means that they're better. And when we talk about liquid milk volume, Montbelliard and Brown Swiss we have here on an equal plane. And you might say that's not right because we generally report lower phenotypic production for Montbelliard, and that is true. I want to explain more about that later, but it has to do with this idea of the Montbelliard breed being in a lot of low input and grazing herds. When we put them in high production herds, I work with a handful of US herds here that milk purebred Montbelliards. They're up within that 25 to 30,000 pound production range, or in kilograms, 12, 13,000 kilogram range. So they are in fact a high liquid volume breed if you put them in that intensive type of system. The Fleckvieh gets lower stars in this area. They're not a milk volume breed. But all 4 of these, or all 3 of these breeds rather, have high percentages of solids in their milk, and particularly for protein. So therefore, when we consider total solids yields, or fat plus protein kilograms, for example, we see Montbelliard and Brown Swiss again producing about equal when they're used for crossbreeding. Our experience is that Fleckviehs produce less. They're lower on total solids yield. And part of that is probably because of their selection history being a dual purpose breed. Fleckvieh has selected for carcass traits throughout their history, whereas Montbelliard is selected purely as a dairy breed with less than 1% of their selection going towards carcass traits. Let's talk quick about size and body condition. Fleckvieh rates the highest on those traits. They have a lot of body condition and a lot of muscling, so they get high stars there. Brown Swiss gets high stars for size because they are a very large frame size breed. They're very tall. And when you use them in crossbreeding, they keep getting taller as they age. Okay. Montbelliard is smaller in frame size than these other, especially smaller than Montbelliard in frame size. And they have more moderate amounts of body condition compared to Fleckvieh. So they're at 4 stars for each of these. I do put Brown Swiss at only 2 stars for body condition. They've in recent decades selected a lot more for more angularity and more show ring types of traits. And so that's why they're lower there. Udder conformation. No doubt Brown Swiss then has done really well in the udder department. They've selected for that. Montbelliard has selected heavily too for udder conformation, and they are acceptable in that area and have improved a lot as a pure breed too over recent years. Fleckvieh, not so much. They're a little bit less emphasis on udder and more into other traits in their program. Direct calving ability. None of the Alps breeds are really fantastic calving ease breeds like the Jersey and like the red breeds. So we're giving them moderate stars here in Montbelliard and Brown Swiss, and just a hair worse here in Fleckvieh based on our experience. And then here in calf survival and calf feeding, both Montbelliard and Fleckvieh are extremely great there. Brown Swiss not. They're really difficult to pale train and to bottle train and cause a lot of frustration there for dairy producers. On fertility and health, very good scores here for both Montbelliard and Fleckvieh. They both do excellent there. Brown Swiss again has really moved away from these type of traits and more towards the production and the type traits in recent selection. So then when we consider their entire longevity and their herd life, we have to balance both this idea of the production traits plus all these other traits, including the health and fertility, and that's what creates a long-lived cow. And that's really why Montbelliard scores the best and why we use them for crossbreeding. They can put together high production plus functional traits to make a really long-lived cow. And the reason Fleckvieh is lower in that scale is because a lot of them experience early culling due to their lower production and their lower udder conformation. And likewise with Brown Swiss, excellent production, excellent type, but they really struggle on these functional traits here. So they end up being culled faster in herds that use them for crossbreeding. I want to illustrate that with some Danish data that has been collected back in 2016. This is a national data set across many herds in Denmark. I think they had over 2 million Holsteins in that data set and several hundred of each of the Montbelliard and the Fleckvieh. And so how I'm presenting this data is Holstein served as the baseline. Montbelliard Holstein F1 crosses are deviated from Holstein, as are the Fleckvieh. So here in the milk production department, this is just fluid volume, kilograms per lactation. The Monty Holstein F1 crosses were a little bit better in first and about equal in second and third compared to Holstein. Fleckvieh, however, was off in milk volume and even more so in the later lactations. But on fat plus protein kilograms, in first, second, and third, Monty Holstein F1s were equal or a little bit better. Again, Fleckvieh Holsteins were less than Holsteins and therefore less than Montbelliard as well. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I describe the lower production volume from the Fleckvieh. If we go back to that same study and look at some functional traits, on fertility, both of these breeds, like I mentioned, are great fertility breeds. Montbelliard by Holstein had fewer calving interval days than the Holstein herd mates, and we would expect that being a strong fertility breed. Fleckvieh even more so. They had shorter calving intervals yet. And really that's not surprising. Usually calving interval and production are dichotomous traits. So in a breed like the Fleckvieh Holstein where they did produce less, no surprise here, they had even shorter calving intervals. But then we look at their survival to subsequent lactations. Both breeds survived better than their Holstein herd mates. So testament to the fact that crossbreeding works, right? But in survival to second lactation and third lactation particularly, the Montbelliard Holstein were superior to the Fleckvieh Holstein. And so they had longer herd life days in total. So just to recap differences then within the Alpine breeds. Why don't we support Fleckvieh for crossbreeding? It's because of these lower volumes of milk and lower fat plus protein that comes with using this breed. Plus, cows are too large for some dairy systems. They have very high body condition scores and high muscling scores. There are some systems where that is very desirable, but in other cases, this could create problems. They often experience early culling and shorter herd lives because of this udder conformation situation that producers often experience. And there's also a lot of variability among their subpopulations. The Fleckvieh has an interesting strategy in that they've developed lines within the breed that are very genetically diverse. And that is excellent for their within breed selection, but it really makes them hard for crossbreeding because you really want a population that's very, usually you get better response with crossbreeding when you have highly inbred breeds that you can cross with each other. That's why in chickens and pigs, crossing in a corn too, or maize, That's why crossing inbred lines works so well for all of those other species and organisms. So this variability could be a drawback if you're not very careful about which fleck-feed line you're selecting. Why not brown Swiss? Well, again, they create a very large stature that increases even more as these cows age. The brown Swiss today is a very poor fertility breed genetically. In fact, if we go back to those 6 US dairy breeds I was describing early on, the brown Swiss today has the lowest genetic ranking for their fertility capacity. So that's not a really great attribute when you want to use them in crossbreeding. Let's pick breeds that have good, with at least acceptable within breed fertility levels. Increasing angularity due to their selection among type and show traits is also a problem because it affects their health and fertility. And then we have these other more nuisance problems. This breed has been proven to be difficult to bottle and pale train as young calves, and that creates this problem of poor survival of those newborn calves. Okay. Let's move on and talk about the red breed cluster. VikingRed is used in ProCROSS because they contribute a lot of health genetics to the 3-breed cross. They're a very healthy breed with good hoof health, low in clinical mastitis, low in somatic cell count. They're a strong calving and reproduction breed, fertility, calving ease, and stillbirth. They really bring this calving ease component to our 3-breed cross for ProCROSS. They're also the breed that moderates the body size the most. They're smaller than the Holstein and the Montbelliard for sure. And plus they're known for their excellent longevity. I want to show you a ranking that is from Interbull and conducted by the Nordic Genetic Evaluation. And the purpose here is to compare these different types of red breeds based on their genetic capacity. And the reason this is interesting is because we can exclude the phenotypic effects of what's going on in the herd due to management. So what I'm summarizing here are bulls from these individual populations that are born in 2014 and later, but have at least 60 daughters in their genetic evaluation. So they're all proven bulls in these statistics. The first thing I want to point out here is that VikingRed and Norwegian Red are the 2 breeds that have substantial numbers of bulls to analyze because they're the bigger populations. We really have very scant data when we come down here to Canadian Ayrshire, the Aussie Red from Australia, and the German Angler. But let's talk about a few important traits here on the genetic level. The Viking Red versus the Norwegian Red, particularly here on production index, the Viking Red tops the whole pile here, guys. And that's why they've been so successful for crossbreeding as a red breed. The difference here between Viking Red and Norwegian Red, this 7 points, index points of spread, it equates to about 252 kilograms of milk, 19 kilograms of fat, and 14 kilograms of protein per lactation that you will see from using Viking Red over Norwegian Red. The breeds are very similar on udder health. On daughter fertility here, Norwegian Red actually has the edge, but they've selected for that intensively for many, many decades already. So it's no surprise there that they're a good fertility breed. On direct calving, they're very similar. Maternal calving, now this is the ability of a dam to give birth to her calf. This is where Viking Red is doing really well compared to the others, and especially to Norwegian Red. We see about 2.3% lower stillbirth at first calving when you have a spread this large of 10 points. That's 1 standard deviation of spread is equal to 2.3% lower stillbirth. On longevity, then, it's no surprise with the difference in production that Viking Red's going to have better genetic capacity for longevity than these other breeds. They also are better on milking speed than a couple of these others. All the breeds are equal here for temperament, maybe Canadian Ayrshire a bit lower here. And then on udder conformation, guys, this is really important. We need cows that with udders that will last to advanced lactations. This is another reason maybe why we're seeing this difference in longevity. The difference between an 86 and a 101 on udder between the Norwegian and the Viking Red, that's 1.5 standard deviation units. So that's a very big difference in udder conformation capacity in these breeds. So just to recap some main points, why not the Norwegian Red? Well, our customers show us, and the data shows us, they're lower in both milk yield and fat and protein yield, and that's really important when you're in, particularly when you're in high production systems, but in all systems that are going to pick breeds for crossbreeding. The poor maternal calving ability has shown up even more in recent years, and it can especially rear its ugly head when you combine with other breeds in a rotation that aren't necessarily ideal for calving ease and calving ability. Their reduced longevity equates to 129 days shorter herd life compared to Viking Red. Um, so that survival right there is a main reason why we've really shifted to Viking Red, and the herds I work with shift to Viking Red. They unfortunately have poor udder conformation, which contributes to that. The other thing I want to mention briefly is that the Viking Red selects now for metabolic feed efficiency. Norwegian Red, on the other hand, does not. Their entire feed efficiency model is based on the size of the cow and reducing maintenance. And the Viking Red breed is doing that too, but it's combining it with this idea of metabolic feed efficiency. And I think as we go down into the future, that's going to be really important because this feed efficiency area of research is really big and has the potential for a lot of financial gain for dairy farms. Why not Aussie Red? Again, we've shown in the last slide much lower production yields, a bit lower on genetic fertility level, shorter herd lives, and then they also struggle on temperament. I also want to mention that this breed, Aussie Red, and these others, again, are smaller selection populations. And the problem with that is that's going to make them harder to have momentum and gaining genetic speed with time compared to the larger breeds. Canadian Ayrshire, again, they struggle on production, the poor sire calving ease, the functional traits of milking speed and temperament. Again, there are really small selection populations of about 6,400 cows in Canada. And the same actually holds true for some other red populations. German Angler, US Ayrshire, and UK Ayrshire are very small populations too. And one problem with that is that that affects your bull availability on a year-to-year working basis. So when you only have 2 or 3 or 5 bulls from any of those populations available for usage, you really don't have any wiggle room then to select a bull within that breed that fits your selection goals for your individual herd. Let's move on and talk about Holstein some then. Holstein breed is a really important part of ProCROSS too. They carry the udder conformation. They've selected for that a long time, so it's no surprise they're a great udder breed. They also are the breed with the high production, high milk solids, and high fluid volume. They've been successful in selection there, of course. Viking Holstein in particular are the one breed, country breed cluster that has the more medium stature. And I want to show that to you on the next slide here when we talk about comparing these populations. These are the 5 largest Holstein country populations recorded by interbull. And I want to go through these trait by trait. So all meaningful selection size populations here. Starting on production, all of these are quite equal, having a range of 105 up to 108. So not a lot of difference there. Perhaps this is interesting, actually, that Viking Red Holstein can maintain such a high production index, considering that their selection goals and their selection progress in these other health and fertility and functional traits has been so aggressive over the last few decades. So then when we talk about things like udder health, no doubt here Viking Holstein has the edge with their strong selection in both somatic cell counts and in reducing clinical mastitis and antibiotic use. On daughter fertility, they're strong there too, a good 4 points ahead of US Holstein and more above these other populations. They're doing even better than some of the other populations on direct calving ability based on the sires that they've used in their breeding program. The maternal calving traits are about equal between these populations, as are their longevity, their milking speed, not a lot of difference in temperament. But then over here in stature, we do see a big reduction for Viking Holstein, and they've really emphasized a smaller frame size of cow throughout recent history and longer. So a 10 point or 1 standard deviation smaller stature compared to US Holstein. Canadian Holstein, interestingly, is up here at 117. And guys, if you've been in Canada, they're typey cows, but man, those are big cows. So compare that with what Viking Holstein has to offer here on reducing body size of cows and creating more feed efficiency because of that smaller cow. I want to talk last about the 2 other breed clusters I mentioned early on that could be considered for rotational crossbreeding. Let's first talk about Jersey. So why is Jersey not a part of ProCROSS? Jersey does have some advantages. They're known as a strong calving ease breed. They have high fat percentages. Um, and Jersey is often looked at because they do reduce body size. They're the smallest body size breed available with significant breed progress. But that difference in body size creates some problems too, namely this large variation in body size that we see when we cross them with other larger breeds. So quintessentially in the US, we see a lot of people try to start their crossbreeding with a Jersey Holstein. We call them Hojos here in the US, if you ever hear that slang term. And most of people's criticisms of Hojos is that they create this large up and down in body size. And that will carry on when you use Jersey in that rotation, because when you come back with that Jersey sire, every now and then you'll see that very tiny cow creeping in. And it creates both a housing problem and a milking problem typically because we build our facilities for a uniform sized cow. And I want to talk more about that when we also pick bulls for ProCROSS too, because size is an important thing. We've done a lot of, when I say we, I mean the University of Minnesota, because that's my background of my career. When we've done research with Jersey for crossbreeding, we noticed udders have become too deep, and this has caused early culling. So we see a lot of people who start with Jersey and then they come over to other breeds because early culling and shorter lifespans from Jersey are a part of that. They don't necessarily have great parlor manners compared to some other choices. Along with the size issue, their calves are very small, and that's a two-pronged problem because A, you're sacrificing a lot of income from having small calves that aren't very valuable. And so that creates a situation where a lot of people euthanize their Jersey bull calves, which is really a big welfare concern for a lot of countries who are now banning euthanization of young calves. And so along with the body size, very low income for cull cows, they are a breed with more somatic cells in their milk. They have higher milk fever typically frequencies than some of the other breeds. In certain breed populations, they do have a lot of Holstein content within their makeup, and that's a concern for using them for crossbreeding because it reduces hybrid vigor. Especially when you pick those bulls that might have the Holstein content. Jersey actually has a decreasing genetic trend for productive life in the US. So we want to pick breeds that are going to improve the longevity of the cross that they participate in. And again, our data shows lower production and later lactations from those cows. So yes, advantages there, but a pretty long list of drawbacks. And that's the basis of the reason why we've steered away from them for ProCROSS. I mentioned Normandy early on too. Just a few points there why they don't make it into the final ProCROSS rotation. They were part of the California study that was published in 2012, and they were one of the breeds evaluated. So these comments come straight out of that study and straight out of the 7 herds who used them in California, plus some other observations from around the world. They showed substantially lower production volume, and along with that, then the fat plus protein volume. The Normandy tended to be very disappointing and variable in their type overall, body type as well as udders and feet and legs. Along with that, the breed had a lot of variability in their size, problems in udder conformation, and then problems in both foot and leg conformation and also foot health because it's a flatter foot with a lower foot angle typically. Okay. I want to now shift into talking more about complementarity of breeds. And it's really important to think about the 3 breeds that you use and how they can work with each other within the rotation to create the perfect cow, okay? So each breed that we work with is going to have a different set of strengths and weaknesses. And that's actually a positive thing because then they can work together when we take them through the rotation. Of course, these strengths and weaknesses come from both their genetic origin as a breed, but then also the way that they've been selected within recent decades. So as you're evaluating the breeds for crossbreeding, and as we've done in ProCross, we've looked at their selection goals and where these breeds are headed. And as ProCross as a company, you probably realize, and I think I mentioned it in the last talk, we're less than 10 years old as a company, and we've really formed because of this wide interest in dairy producers in crossbreeding. But it was a very careful strategic formulation of the breeds and of this company. And it was because we paid attention to what farmers wanted, and we paid attention to what these different breeds are doing and what they have to offer in their selection goals. Okay. ProCross is successful and has been in a wide range of herd environments as well. So that's another important thing to think about when you're selecting breeds and how they perform. Do they fit your environment? And we've learned that ProCross does well in both a grass-based grazing environment, but they also do extremely well in high input confinement environments too. I want to show you an idea of how this complementarity and compensatory traits works out from trait to trait. Here I'm showing you the contribution of each breed to these different traits. VikingHolstein is in black here, Coopex Montbéliarde in the tan, and the VikingRed in the red here at the top. Starting with solid yields, you know, Holstein is a really big contributor to this. The Montbelliard, of course, and the VikingRed less so for solids yield. Going on through these other traits, you can see we have different levels of complementarity and different things that these breeds contribute. For example, the Montbelliard here, you can see that their biggest contributions are fertility, health, survival, and body condition, and also the foot and leg conformation. So that's what they have to offer that helps offset these big strengths we see, for example, in Holstein, where they're strong in udders, strong in the yield traits, but they're very poor in these traits here on the fertility, longevity, and the body condition particularly. They're a very angular cow. Same thing for the VikingRed. The VikingRed is especially strong in calving traits and calving ease. They are the fat breed of this rotation, whereas the Montbelliard is more of the protein percentage breed, and they offer contributions there as well. I mentioned feet and legs early on too. The Montbelliard really has the foot and leg conformation. The VikingRed really has more strength on the foot health part. So again, all of the breeds work together on all these traits, and each adds strengths and weaknesses to what we're putting together here. Another thing to think about on complementarity is how you're going to select your bulls within the breed. And we've learned a lot about this through our producer experience over the years, especially when it comes to VikingRed. We suggest selecting your bulls with an eye on increasing production, increasing udder conformation scores within breed, and looking for VikingReds that offer larger body size. That makes for a better ProCROSS cow. On the Montbelliard, we tend to steer our farmers towards, again, increasing udder conformation, moderating the frame size, and by that I mean we try to steer away from bulls that are extremely small and bulls that make cows extremely large. Neither of those are desirable. Within the Montbelliard breed, we particularly keep an eye on sire calving ease and stay away from the poor calving ease bulls, and then improving temperament scores. In Holstein, actually, even though the Holstein is already strong in production and udder conformation, when we've learned that when we emphasize those traits even more, we get a better ProCROSS cow because those are the highly heritable traits. Okay. The idea of crossbreeding and hybrid vigor means that it works more effectively on the low heritability traits. And that's why we steer towards some within breed selection in these. And of course, decreasing stature because they're the large stature breed. I want to introduce you to the production levels and the population sizes within breed for the 3 breeds of ProCROSS. Across the top here, you can see all 3 breeds are very effective in their population size and have large populations to work with. All 3 of them have implemented genomic selection in a wide way amongst that population as well, and from the bull stud themselves and not selective genomic testing from the dairy farmers. Okay, that's really important. When we look at their phenotypic levels, we do see a few differences. Holstein, no surprise, is very high in milk, fat, and protein production. Montbelliard phenotypically, again, is the lowest, and this is due to the herd environments in which we find them in France. Okay. On fat and protein percentages, the VikingRed does very well in this department, as does Montbelliard, particularly when it comes to protein percentages. The VikingHolstein is doing very well phenotypically. This has increased in recent years, mostly due to the feeding systems that we've now implemented just in the last 5 to 10 years for herds really worldwide, but especially in Scandinavia. And then energy corrected milk here, it's based on the European model here with a 4.0 fat correction. So you can see kind of where the breeds land on that as well. Let's also mention the stature. Now, the Montbelliard and the VikingHolstein, it's no surprise that the Holsteins are the tallest, Montbelliard are more intermediate, and the VikingRed is the smallest. What is surprising is how much the VikingRed breed has changed just in the last 5 to 10 years. They really used to be a very small breed and a lot closer to the Jersey frame size. But in recent years, they've really increased and now are up to 142.5 centimeters or 56 inches for my US audience. Okay. So really the idea of small VikingReds is not a problem anymore compared to that concern from maybe 10 or 20 years ago. I do want to talk some more about this production in Montbelliard level, and particularly people often balk at the energy corrected milk here. By the way, if you were to do energy corrected milk using the US formula, this would equate to about 20,937 pounds of energy corrected milk for Montbelliard, and 21,000 pounds would actually be a very respectable level for a herd that's housed in a grazing low input organic system. And remember, in France, about 50% of the herds house and milk cows in this model. So I think it's easy to say that this breed is producing higher than US dairy cows that are organic and or in grazing low input environments. But then there's also the other 50% of the breed selected from confinement herds with a very aggressive high energy TMR diet too. Okay. So let me finish up today by talking about just a few common questions I often get from dairy farmers about this idea of picking breeds and which breeds to use. One I often hear is, I'm an organic dairy and I do graze intensively. Is ProCROSS for me? Because we do hear conflicting data about that and which breeds should be used in these low input herds, like in New Zealand and like in Australia, for example, in particular. But we have to remember genetic selection programs in both VikingRed and Montbelliard include many of these organic grazing herds and cows. So we've already selected for cows that perform well there within those two breeds. And we also do have experience in New Zealand, in Australia, in South America, where grazing is quite common, in some of the US, where ProCross has been very successful in those environments compared to other types of crosses and compared to Holsteins as well. I come out of the University of Minnesota system, as I mentioned before, and a part of our research there was looking at low input grazing, a model at the Morris Research Station. And to date, that herd has 22 years of experience in ProCross and or in crossbreeding rather, and has been using ProCross since 2008. Today, Montbelliard is a favored sire breed in that system. So that's why, if you poll me personally, I'm very adamant that Montbelliard is successful and important to use in a grazing environment as well. What about Jersey as far as being efficient? Because we care about body size of cows in a lot of environments. This gets back to kind of that grazing question again. A lot of farmers ask me then, aren't they the most efficient? Should I use pure Jersey instead because they're so small? Or shouldn't I at least consider Jersey for crossbreeding? And so, yes, the lower body weight of a Jersey cow reduces their maintenance energy requirement. But we have to consider too the metabolic efficiency. And by metabolic efficiency, I mean when that cow eats her meal, how is she going to digest the fiber, the starch, the energy within that diet? And does she use those components to make milk and to keep herself healthy and fertile? And that's the part that's really a black hole within our research these days. So we do see exciting things on the horizon for these other breeds in that metabolic efficiency department, because that really matters. As far as the argument against Jersey as a pure breed for the feed efficiency part, hybrid vigor is important for feed efficiency, and we see this. We see this certainly when we look at other species, particularly feed efficiency in beef cattle and in pigs. That's really the crux of steering away from pure Jersey, where in the US and in some other countries, they do in fact have a high inbreeding coefficient. And that high inbreeding works in equal and opposite effect to the hybrid vigor from crossbreeding. Okay. But then the last thing to consider, and we already talked about this, Jersey does not combine well with some other breeds when we use them for crossbreeding. So those negatives like the body size variation, the deeper udders, the lower solids production and later lactations, those things crop back up and probably outweigh any advantage that you're going to see in the maintenance energy gains that you get from Jersey. Okay. I sometimes get the question, ProCross cows look so thick. How can they possibly be feed efficient carrying that much body weight? And shouldn't I be using breeds that are more that really have a lot of angularity, so like the channel breeds and not like the Alpine breeds? Okay. So the first thing to think about and to recognize is that ProCross cows have higher body condition scores, but they do typically weigh the same as a Holstein cow would in the same herd environment. And that's because they're shorter, but they have higher body condition. That's important to recognize because the fat carried on these cows in the form of body condition requires less energy to maintain than the other portions of body tissue, like the muscle and like the bone. Those are higher energy requirement tissues. The fat's just kind of along for the free ride. And those of us who carry a little extra body weight, like myself, kind of knows that this is true. It doesn't take a whole lot of calorie intake to maintain that extra body fat. Um, so this is important because we use body weight to estimate the energy needs of a cow, and we aren't very careful about discerning whether it's muscle or bone or viscera. So um, that kind of comes into effect on what we should expect on feed efficiency too. And so we know that during the growth phase too, the additional body condition that the ProCROSS cows are adding, say versus a Holstein, probably doesn't require additional feed cost. Plus that we have hybrid vigor for average daily gain, and that may counterbalance any additional feed needed to increase this fat during the growth phase. Body condition is really important though for fertility and health, and that's why it's really desirable on a ProCROSS cow. And on this topic of feed efficiency, we're really good at considering feed efficiency only as pounds of solids produced or pounds of milk produced over the feed she eats. And guys, that's a really crude way to think about feed efficiency because feed efficiency is more than just the production component. It's also what does the cow require to maintain the pregnancy and to stay healthy? So I really look forward to a day in our industry when we consider those components because that really plays into the profitability of our dairy systems. I often get asked, the genetic progress of a Holstein is huge. So why do I need to crossbreed? Yeah, so it's important to recognize that genetic progress within each pure breed is very important to success for ProCROSS. But that hybrid vigor comes on top of the genetic progress within breed. So yes, we want to pick 3 breeds with aggressive genetic progress, but then use them in a rotation to also get the hybrid vigor. It's not an either or part of this equation. It's good breeds with good genetic progress plus the hybrid vigor, okay? And when we use those good bulls with good selection within breed, that's just fixed right in the genome of that cow and passed on to her subsequent offspring. We also need to acknowledge that, yes, the progress of the Holstein is huge, but particularly within milk production traits. Interestingly, that progress within production is not different from that of VikingRed and Montbelliard, who are also making equal strides in the genetic progress for milk production. But unlike Montbelliard and VikingRed, the genetic improvement in Holstein for the fertility and the health traits are very recent. In fact, in the US, selection for health traits are so recent that we're not really even measuring the genetic progress there at this time, okay? When you add in those ideas with this management component level, yes, we also need to do a good job managing all breeds, including ProCROSS, in well-managed herds. That's part of the equation too. So what I'm saying here is ProCROSS is not a Band-Aid for poor management. But with that said, the hybrid vigor that we find for crossbreeding has been demonstrated to be equal or higher in those high-performing herd environments. So this is really evidence that says, if you're a well-managed herd and you can manage cows well, ProCROSS will do just as well for you as the pure breeds and as Holstein will, even in those high production, high management herds. Last, I want to talk about, are all red breeds the same? And I think we've been through this enough in this talk. So the obvious answer is here, no. VikingRed ranks the highest for almost all of the important economic traits, particularly the production and the udders and the longevity, and those are really important for the total profit equation. So these additive genes are important within breed. They're passed on to future generations. And so it's really important that we look at the attributes of the individual breeds and not just pick whichever is convenient or whichever is going to give us the best sales deal at the time. Okay. So to sum up my talk today, yes, we use 3 distinct pure breeds, and that's a tenet of ProCROSS, is getting that in order to achieve the hybrid vigor. If we use breeds that are similar with each other, like let's say we pick a rotation of Montbelliard, Fleckvieh, and Brown Swiss, those 3 breeds are very similar and we're going to impair hybrid vigor, okay? So we need breeds that come from those different circles that I showed you earlier on in the presentation. The same will come true with Holstein. I hear people who want to crossbreed a Friesian and a Holstein. Those breeds are too similar in their genetic heritage to create hybrid vigor. So pick breeds that come from different breed clusters, okay? Can't drive that home enough. Then assess the strengths and weaknesses of the individual breeds. Pay attention to the population size and those selection goals for the traits that you really care about and that are important for the profitability, okay? And then last, we like breeds that complement each other in their strengths and weaknesses. If we pick all breeds that are really high production breeds, guess what? We're going to get a high production cow that really lacks on the functional traits and lacks on fertility and health. So it's not just enough to pick the top milking breeds. We need a whole package here for a cow that's going to last and be profitable. And with that, I want to stop. I'm sorry we don't have a ton of time for questions, but I do want to bring in a few if we have some here. And let me stop sharing and go to the chat here. Okay. Yeah, good question here. Is there anywhere that the Montbelliard production data is broken down by production environment? And for example, production for intensive environment Montbelliards and production for grazing shown separately. Yeah, that's a really great question. And not to my knowledge, no. This isn't the first time I've been asked for this request, so I'm actually trying to tease that out of the data that we have here in the US, because like I mentioned, we have a handful of herds we're working with where Montbelliard is in high production environments. There aren't many cows and it's not many herds, but I'm hoping we can gather that up and show it to folks because I think it's going to be really compelling. Okay. Any other, let me check here.
Thank you, Amy, for your presentation. We have some more questions on Facebook. Let me just introduce the first one from Abu Bakar. Does VikingRed solve issues of stature common on Ayrshire breed?
Do they solve the issues of what about the Ayrshire
stature
breed?
Stature, sorry.
I mean, I'm not sure I totally understand what they're asking, but the Ayrshire cluster tends to be a smaller cluster of breeds than some others like Holstein. The VikingRed, I'm not, they've gotten bigger. They might be bigger than some others. I would venture a guess though, Canadian Ayrshire's got to be pretty large. I would think US Ayrshire is large body size because they've been selected more for conformation type traits and show ring type traits. But all that to say, one reason why VikingRed has gotten bigger on body size too is because it's correlated with the production traits. So as we select for more production, we're going to get bigger body size too. So body size alone is not a reason to pick a breed cluster. So I think I've hammered that home in the last hour. We need to consider all these different parts. And if you want a bigger red breed, you also need to balance that with what the breed offers in all these other categories. And so again, that's why we go back to VikingRed. They're strong in all of the functional traits too, really strong in the production traits. But yes, the VikingRed breed has gotten bigger with time, and that's because producers ask for it and because we're selecting heavier on production.
Thanks for your answer, Amy. Another one regarding, because you mentioned that actually early in your presentation, what's the difference between ProCROSS and Girolando, Gyr cross with Holstein?
Yeah, so Girolando does include the Gyr, which is one of those Bos indicus breeds I mentioned early on. And like I was alluding to, the Gyr component can be really important in humid climates, really hot temperatures that really have a specific kind of environmental stress. Also, from my knowledge on Gyr, they have a lot of insect resistance and disease resistance that those insects cause. In particularly, I think of Gyr in South America in that way. So yeah, the Girolando might fit well in that environment. We also, in our company, though, have done some work with combining Gyr and Montbelliard. Those crosses are very successful too in a lot of ways. So I think that there's still more research work to be done there, but please realize that the Girolando, even though it has Gyr and Holstein, might not be the only answer. And there's certainly other alternatives out there to combine Gyr with to achieve those same environmental, overcome those challenges rather, but plus add other traits in the functional department and increase production, which I think is why Girolando is popular. It's because it increases production from Holstein. But then there's other things to think about, and we can put Gyr in part of a 3-breed cross and do all those things too. Okay, so a lot to think about there in those special environments.
Thank you. Do we have time for another one?
I know we're past time, but for those who are still left, if anyone wants to stick around, I'm happy to keep answering questions. Yeah.
Okay, there is another one regarding ProCROSS. Do ProCROSS adapt well under hot tropical temperatures?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, hybrid vigor does a lot of interesting things when it comes to environmental challenges, and it does help with heat stress. Believe it or not, us up here in the upper Midwest, where I look outside today and it's pretty chilly and a little breezy, we do have heat stress days in the upper Midwest is what I'm getting at. Not to the same degree, certainly, as a lot of other climates. But when we study ProCROSS cows in those heat stress days and compare them to Holsteins, their production depression that they experience with heat stress tends to be of a shorter duration, and they also tend to rebound back to a higher level than their Holstein herd mates. So in other words, yes, they're handling heat stress better than a Holstein. And I think when we move into hotter and even more severe climates, we could demonstrate that and replicate it, that they're probably going to do better. Maybe it has some things to do with those other breeds. Maybe it's all in the hybrid vigor. That part hasn't really been teased out well to my knowledge. But yeah, we should expect better heat tolerance out of a ProCROSS than the pure breeds and then Holstein.
Thank you. We have another question regarding daughter pregnancy index for ProCROSS. What is ProCROSS index value of daughter's pregnancy? I think they are mentioning the advantage of ProCROSS for daughter pregnancy.
Okay, yeah, so we have compared fertility statistics of ProCROSS versus Holstein, and we do see enhanced fertility levels, conception rates, better pregnancy rates, shorter calving intervals in the studies we've done. I really want to spend a lot of time showing you the data on that in a future presentation, but typically herds, in an average system are going to find about a 2-week advantage in shortening calving intervals and lowering days open. So 2 weeks, we can multiply that out by the value of a day open, and it actually adds a whole lot of income to the production equation because those days open tend to be pretty valuable with time. And not only does it shorten the calving interval, but it also makes it so that those cows are actually getting pregnant and staying in the herd. So that's one of the foundational reasons why we see more longevity from ProCROSS. It's because those cows are getting pregnant and they're staying for that next lactation. And it's not simply the part that they're getting pregnant faster, if that makes sense. So I'm challenging you to think about it a little bit more broadly in terms of the economics and the longevity impact of the fertility too. And it's definitely there. It's due to the breeds we use. It's due to the hybrid vigor from the ProCROSS rotation.
Thank you, Diana.
Any others that we have, either on Facebook or I don't see any more in my chat here on Zoom.
I think we have been through all the other questions from Facebook.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for your help with those, Bastian, and thank you everybody for your attention today and for offering those really excellent questions. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope you've gotten some out of it too. Please tune in next time. Check out this recording on YouTube later on, or our other seminars too, for that matter. I wish you all a great day and a very happy and prosperous holiday season. Thanks much. Bye-bye.